Happy Monday. Thank you for joining me for this week's Weekly Wisdom. Now, this week is a continuation as we're looking at unlocking the magic of leadership. And this week we are going to be looking at channel your inner Elsa and let it go. Now, every once in a while, I have these moments where something happens and I completely want to go off and lose my cool, but then I remember, like, what would I tell myself if myself was coming to me for advice? It gets very confusing. This happened last week. I was getting ready to travel to go to New York to work with a client in an almost all-day workshop. It was a big deal. There was a lot riding on it, and I was really excited to work with this client. Well, it happened to be during the cold snap. And so I was really worried. We got snow in Texas. We know what happens with snow in Texas. Although I gotta say, state handled it a little bit better than I was expecting this year. And so the day arrives, I'm at the airport because I had stayed over the night before, so I wouldn't have to worry about getting to the airport the next day. So I'm at the airport, I'm getting ready, and I'm sitting in the Admirals Club, counting down the minutes until I get on my plane. And then all of the flights to New York got canceled because of the weather that was happening in New York. And I was like, And so I go up to the person in the Admirals Club and I'm like, hey, this is what's going on. Can you help? And she was like, absolutely. And so we start looking, can we get me close to New York? If we can get me close, I can figure out how to get there. And so she's checking Philadelphia and she's checking Boston. And it was like playing a game of musical chairs. Every time she would have me a seat on a plane, somebody else would book it before she could. So finally, looked at her and I was like, hey, what about DC? I know there's a train that goes up from DC. She said, okay. So she got me a flight, got me a seat on a flight going to DC that was leaving in 30 minutes. I was like, all right, we got this. So I race across the airport, get on the flight, sit down, take a deep breath, and then realize I have to figure out how I'm going to get from DC to New York. So this is where I start tapping into my resources and my team and texting a couple of people and being like, hey, who has time to assist? Somebody stepped up and said, I have time to assist. So we did something that we had never done before, which was one, troubleshoot while I'm in the air, and two, figure out how to get me on a train because I've never been on a train before. So worked it all out, figured out how to get me on the train, figured out how to get me from the airport to the train, got to the train, had just a little bit of time to grab something to eat, take a deep breath before I'm figuring out how does a train work. So get on the train, and while I'm there, I'm super stressed. Blood pressure is going through the roof. Y'all have had these moments where it's like all of these little things go wrong, but it ends up adding up. And then you tie into it, it's something that you've never done before. So you're like feeling all of the stress and the anxiety. And maybe you've had to delegate something that you normally wouldn't delegate. And you're like, right? Have you had those moments? Have you had those moments where it just completely felt like you were losing control? That was what it was for me. And then I get on the plane, get on the train. While I'm on the train, I'm waiting, I'm looking around, and then the train starts moving. And it was like being a little kid again. I get to do something for the first time that I have never done before. And I'm watching the world fly by. And I take some time before I dive into all the work that has to be done. I take some time and just let it go. And that's what the chapter in the book is about. It's called Channel Your Inner Elsa and Let It Go. And when we do that, when we take control of the things that we do have control over, and in that moment, the only thing I had control over was what I was going to do with my time while I was on that train. I didn't have control over the planes. I didn't have control over the weather. I didn't have control over anything else. It was what was I going to do in that moment? I did some square breathing, calmed myself down, appreciated the view, the snow. It was beautiful, and enjoyed this first time experience. So when you are in the midst of the chaos, when the world is revolving faster than you are and you're just trying to keep up, ask yourself, what do I actually have control over right now? What can I actually influence? Because when we focus on those things that we can control, Stephen Covey calls it the sphere of control. When we focus on those things that we can control, it helps us let go of a lot of the anxiety and worry about the things that we can't. because we're building the backup plans. We're figuring out plan A, B, and C. We are influencing and controlling what we can actually influence and control instead of just pouring energy down that black hole of nothingness that does nothing except exhaust us. So the next time you find yourself in a whirlwind, ask yourself, what am I able to control and what do I need to let go of? All right. Thank you for joining me for this week's Weekly Wisdom. I hope you have an absolutely amazing week. And don't forget, as always, you got this. I'll see you next week.